My name is Jen Nice, and I've always been the black sheep of the family since childhood. In our family, where ideals were laid out according to the strict canons of a successful life, my interests seemed like some kind of audacious rebellion. All I wanted was to draw. I would sit at my desk for hours, bringing fantastical creatures, superheroes, and magical worlds to life on paper. I felt as though the reality around me dissolved, leaving only the scratch of my pencil on the paper and the vivid images flashing in my imagination. School, for me, was more of a necessity than a passion. I would wait eagerly for every evening to return to my sketchbook, dreaming of the day when I could dedicate myself entirely to my art. However, in my family's eyes, this was nothing more than a pointless hobby. When I graduated from school, it was time to make a choice that would determine my future. Everyone around me, my parents, teachers, and friends, insisted that going to university was the only right path. But I chose a different route. Instead of the prestigious university my family had dreamed of for me, I enrolled in a 3D modeling course. I still vividly remember that day. My mom was standing in the kitchen with a dish towel in her hands when I gathered the courage to tell her about my decision. She froze, as if she couldn't believe her ears. "What do you mean? You're not going to college?" she asked, her voice a mixture of shock and confusion. While my older sister Jessica was the embodiment of my parents' dreams, she graduated from university, got a stable job, and married the perfect Tom. I seemed like something entirely different to them. Mom would repeat like a mantra that Jessica had a real career. Whenever I tried to explain that modern technologies and platforms like YouTube could form the foundation of a successful career, I was met with nothing but derisive glances. Dad, with his typical skepticism, would retort, "YouTube isn't a job, Jen Nice. If you keep this up, you'll be living with us forever." It was painful to hear, but even more painful to see these words supported by Jessica and Tom's smiles. At every family dinner, they found opportunities to throw another snide remark my way. "Jen Nice, did you see the comments on your latest video?" Jessica once said, holding out her phone with a smirk. "Those people are tearing you apart." Tom, as always, backed her up. "Maybe it's a sign. Maybe animation just isn't your thing." Those words cut me to the core, but I didn't let them see how much they hurt. Instead of giving up, I focused on improving myself. I spent countless hours analyzing successful channels, studying their storytelling techniques, character dynamics, and even their color palettes. I completely transformed my style, making it brighter and more dynamic. The changes didn't happen overnight. At first, my animations still went unnoticed. Sometimes, it felt like I was hitting a wall, but the thought that giving up meant losing kept me going. And then, one day, my efforts started to pay off. 10 subscribers turned into 100, and 100 into 1,000. It was a small step forward, but it felt monumental to me. I knew I was on the right path now. Every time I hit a new milestone, whether it was the number of subscribers or the size of a sponsorship deal, Jessica would inevitably roll her eyes and skillfully change the subject. She would usually segue into her latest accomplishments, a promotion at work, a new project, or a trip with Tom. Sometimes, I felt like she did it intentionally, as if to erase even the hint of my progress from the family's memory. 3 years passed. 3 long, relentless years that flew by like stop-motion animation, frame by frame, week by week. During that time, my channel turned into something far beyond what I could have dreamed of when I first started. It wasn't just a hobby or an attempt to prove something to my family, it became my life. The money that once seemed like a fantasy now flowed in abundance. Sponsorship deals, merchandise sales, animation contracts, all of it became my reality. Every month, my bank account grew with amounts I hadn't even imagined. But I stayed silent. I didn't tell my family how much I was earning. Let them think I was still struggling to find my footing. I decided to reveal the truth at the right moment, when they least expected it. That moment came during one of our usual family dinners. Jessica and Tom were, as always, seated in their usual spots. Mom had just pulled her signature lasagna out of the oven, and Dad was setting the table with napkins. The conversation revolved around yet another of Jessica's job offers. Her promotion was discussed louder and longer than the taste of the lasagna itself. I patiently waited for a pause to make my announcement. "I have an announcement," I said calmly, putting down my fork. Everyone turned to me with mild surprise. I held the dramatic pause, looking at their faces. "Next week, I'm moving out. I've rented an apartment." The silence that followed my words was almost deafening. Jessica, who had just taken a sip of wine, choked. "You what?" she stammered, exchanging glances with Tom. "Where did you find the money for an apartment? Dad, are you paying for this?" I smiled faintly, savoring the moment. "Actually, my channel is doing pretty well. So well, in fact, that I could afford to rent a house if I wanted to." Mom dropped her fork. The sound of metal hitting the porcelain plate rang out like thunder in a clear sky. "What money are you talking about?" Jessica asked sharply. She looked at me as if trying to read my mind and find answers there. "It's impossible for you to make that much on YouTube." I simply shrugged. Their questions came at me in a torrent. They wanted exact figures, tried to coax the details out of me, but I stayed calm and silent. The next morning, I moved into my new apartment. It was small, but that didn't matter. It was mine. Finally, no more control, no judgmental looks, no snide comments over breakfast. Here, I could be myself and fully focus on my work. My new apartment became my true sanctuary. I had a dedicated animation studio, complete with all the equipment I had once only dreamed of. My style continued to evolve, my stories grew deeper, and my audience expanded. Soon, I surpassed the milestone of 1 million subscribers. I was now earning more than I had ever imagined. When I showed up at another family dinner, I was wearing designer jeans and carrying a Gucci handbag. It was my first truly expensive gift to myself. Jessica couldn't take her eyes off my bag the entire dinner. She tried to seem indifferent, but I could see the curiosity bubbling inside her. "Is that real Gucci?" she asked, attempting to sound nonchalant. "Maybe," I replied, hiding a smile behind my glass of water. That moment marked a turning point. At first, the changes in their attitude were almost imperceptible. One day, at dinner, Dad mentioned that the water bill had been higher than usual. Another time, Mom casually mentioned that the refrigerator was starting to make strange noises and might need replacing. Then, during a conversation, it came up that taxes had increased that year, making it harder to cover the bills. I listened silently, and then, without saying a word, I pulled out my checkbook and wrote them a check. The amount was more than enough to cover their expenses with some left over. The look of relief on their faces made me feel better than I could have expected. In that moment, I realized that, for the first time, I might have proven my worth to them. Soon enough, helping my family became second nature to me. The fridge broke. I'd find a way to replace it. The roof needed repairs. Let me know where to send the money. Utility bills? No problem. The money I was making was more than enough to cover these expenses without straining my own finances, while still regularly contributing to my savings for the future. Sometimes, I reflected on how funny life could be. As a child, I had always felt overshadowed by Jessica and her perfect, flawless life, but now the roles had reversed. While my career as an animator was skyrocketing, Jessica's life began to crack at the seams. It started when she got pregnant with her first child. Tom, despite his status as the perfect husband, suddenly didn't seem so successful. Their financial stability started to falter, and I noticed it long before they were ready to admit it. At one family dinner, I saw Jessica for the first time without her usual expensive jewelry. Instead of designer clothes, she was wearing simple outfits from a department store. Throughout the dinner, she barely touched her food, just absently moving her fork around her plate. Tom, on the other hand, spoke louder than usual, as if trying to compensate for the awkwardness by complaining about rising prices and rent. Then Jessica, rocking her baby on her lap, mumbled, "They grow up so fast. Diapers, clothes, everything is so expensive." At one point, she glanced at my watch, a small gift I had bought myself after reaching 5 million subscribers. In the past, Jessica would have made a sarcastic remark, but this time her gaze was different, tired, tinged with slight envy and acknowledgement. It was a new look I had never seen from her before. That evening, I couldn't fall asleep for a long time. Flipping through the memories of the dinner, I felt an intense desire to help her, no matter how absurd it sounded after all our past clashes. Opening my banking app, I set up an automatic monthly transfer to her account. It wasn't anything extravagant, but it was enough to ease some of their financial burden. A few days later, Jessica called me. Her voice sounded both surprised and grateful. "Jen, nice, was that you?" she asked, clearly trying to maintain her pride, but I could hear the relief in her tone. "You don't have to do this." "That's what sisters are for," I replied, and in that moment, I felt that something new had formed between us. For the first time in years, I didn't see her as a rival but as a sister. Meanwhile, my own life was accelerating. At the age of 26, I decided it was time for the next big step. Working from home was convenient, but my ambitions demanded more. I rented an entire floor in a modern office building with panoramic windows, glass partitions, and stylish furniture. Everything about it spoke to the future I was building. I started hiring employees, talented artists and writers who shared my passion for creating high-quality content. Together, we worked on projects that had once seemed out of reach. Mom was shocked when I told them about the new office over dinner. "You have your own company now?" she asked, her face a mixture of pride and astonishment. "Yes," I smiled. "A whole team of animators. We're doing amazing things." My success snowballed. I bought myself an apartment in a luxury high-rise building with a doorman, followed by a new car. It wasn't ostentatious luxury, but it was a symbol of my freedom. All the while, I continued to help my family, doing so quietly and without drawing attention to myself. When Jessica announced that she was expecting her second child, her voice trembled with an attempt to sound joyful. But I could see the worry in her eyes. Tom had recently lost his job, and his side gigs barely covered their current expenses. After dinner, as we were washing dishes, she confessed, "We might have to move to a smaller apartment. The landlord is raising the rent again." I didn't hesitate for even a second. "Don't worry about the rent. I'll cover it," I said, without lifting my eyes from the plate I was drying. Jessica initially wanted to object, but instead, she just quietly nodded, as though a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. And so, I took over paying my sister's rent. It wasn't a burden, it was an opportunity to show her that, despite our past differences, I was ready to support her. The same sister who once threw casual, mocking comments about my useless cartoons was now living in an apartment paid for by those very cartoons. And, surprisingly, her sarcastic remarks stopped altogether. Money, it seemed, had the power not only to change circumstances but also perspectives. Our family dinners, which had once turned into arenas for cutting remarks and criticism, had now become a regular ritual. Every Saturday, I would join my parents, where Jessica, Tom, and their kids would already be waiting. The food was always delicious. Mom still cooked as if every week were a small celebration. Jessica's kids brought joy with their carefree laughter, and, on the surface, everything seemed perfect. But, as is often the case, small dramas lingered behind the facade of calm. At some point, I began to notice a pattern. Mom, carefully stirring sugar into her coffee, would casually mention, "The washing machine is making noise again. Maybe it's time to replace it." Jessica would chime in, "Tommy is growing so fast. He needs a new wardrobe for school." Then she'd add, almost as an afterthought, "And, with the baby, there's always something." Appliances would break, medical bills would rise, the kids needed new school supplies. Meanwhile, Dad, seemingly offhandedly, would grumble about how the roof needed repairs before winter. These hints were no longer subtle. They had become almost an expected part of every dinner. I always responded the same way, "Why not?" After all, my latest merchandise deal could easily cover their expenses for a year, and I found satisfaction in seeing their relief. It became something of a ritual. After dinner, I'd write another check or set up a bank transfer on my phone. I watched them as Mom served dessert and Dad shared one of his old jokes. Jessica's kids enthusiastically smeared ice cream across their plates, and Tom, though visibly tired, laughed genuinely. These moments brought me more joy than I had anticipated. But one day, I wanted to do more. My family deserves something special, something they would remember forever. That's how the idea came to me, a family vacation. What if we all spent 2 weeks in Hawaii? I suggested during one of our dinners. Their expressions at that moment were worth every dollar I had ever earned. Mom, standing by the table with a serving spoon in her hand, dropped it onto the floor. "Hawaii?" Jessica whispered, as though afraid that if she said it too loudly, the offer would disappear. You're serious." "Serious," I confirmed. "Everything is paid for." The trip turned out to be incredible. For the first time in years, my parents were able to truly relax. I saw Mom sitting on the beach with a cocktail in her hand, while Dad smiled as he watched Jessica's kids build their first sandcastle. Even Tom seemed to find the strength to set aside his worries and simply enjoy the moment. When the vacation ended, Mom cried as she hugged me goodbye. But I already knew this wouldn't be the last surprise. Their 35th wedding anniversary was approaching, and I wanted to do something truly special. This was my chance to thank them for everything, even for the times they doubted my success. I planned every detail. The anniversary party was organized to perfection, food from their favorite restaurant, decorations, new outfits for both of them, and a house full of relatives and old friends. The atmosphere was magical. We all laughed, shared stories from the past, and even Jessica, despite her exhaustion, looked happy. When it came time for gifts, I handed my parents a small box. Inside was a tiny metal keychain shaped like a bell. Mom opened it, furrowed her brow in confusion, and asked, "What's this?" "Look out the window," I said with a smile. In the driveway sat a brand new SUV, gleaming under the evening lights, with a large red bow on the roof. It wasn't overly expensive or flashy, but was perfectly suited for them. Mom clasped her hands over her mouth, her eyes filling with tears. This is for us," she murmured. "For you," I confirmed. "Consider it a thank you for everything you've done for us." Dad, who rarely showed his emotions, looked deeply moved. He walked over to me, patted me lightly on the shoulder, and quietly said, "Thank you, Jen. Nice." Safe, comfortable, spacious, the new car was perfect for transporting groceries, grandchildren, and anything else my family could need. They hugged me so tightly it hurt for a moment, but all I could think about was the happiness on their faces. "I'm so proud of you," Mom whispered in my ear, her voice filled with genuine joy. She looked at me with such love that I felt warmth spread through my chest. Looking back, I should have noticed something strange in their expressions. Their moment of pride seemed too strained, as if it was concealing something. But at the time, I was too consumed by the joy of finally being able to give back to my family to notice. 2 weeks after the anniversary celebration, Mom and Dad went grocery shopping, excited to finally take their new SUV for a spin. I stayed behind at the house to enjoy the quiet, In my childhood home, everything felt unchanged: the scent of aged wood, the familiar creaks and sounds, the comforting warmth. I decided to take the opportunity to help Mom with what she called the mess in Dad's study, a mountain of old papers, photographs, and documents she'd been meaning to sort through for ages. I started with one of the old drawers. It felt like a journey into the past: report cards from elementary school, Jessica's college acceptance letters, yellowed birthday cards we'd made by hand years ago. I even found one of my awful childhood drawings, depicting our family with disproportionate heads and oddly shaped hands. Smiling, I continued sorting through the papers until my eyes fell on a new yellow manila envelope. This envelope stood out from the rest. It was too new, too neat, too official. I wasn't supposed to open it. But something inside me wouldn't let me ignore it. With trembling hands, I pulled out its contents and began to read. It was a legal document, dated just a few days after the anniversary party. On the title page, it read, "Last Will and Testament." My heart sank. I tried to focus on the text, but the legal jargon felt like a blur. I read the words, but they didn't make sense until I found the part that mattered most. All assets and property are to be passed on to our daughter, Jessica Martin. I read that line again. And again. My name wasn't mentioned anywhere. Anywhere. The house I had helped pay for, the car I had just gifted them, everything was listed under Jessica's name. The envelope shook in my hands, but it wasn't about the money. I had plenty of that. It wasn't about ownership or material gain. It was about trust, about the meaning behind those hugs and smiles, behind the words, "We're so proud of you." In that moment, all of it suddenly felt fake. Had their happiness been genuine? Or had it all been a performance? Time seemed to stand still. I stood frozen in the study, staring at the document, until the sound of the front door slamming broke the silence. Voices and footsteps filled the house. Mom was laughing, her voice ringing through the air as it always did. "Jen, nice, we're back." "Where are you?" she called. I took a deep breath, feeling my feet rooted to the floor, as though they had grown into it. But slowly, I made my way downstairs, still clutching the envelope in my hands. When I stepped into the living room, my parents were already there with their grocery bags. They were smiling, chatting about how well the car drove. Smiling, until they saw me. Their smiles vanished in an instant, like a shadow swallowing sunlight. The bags slipped from Mom's hands. Her face turned pale, as if the blood had drained from it. Dad stood frozen, staring at me with an expression I could only describe as fear, though I couldn't yet understand why. I held up the envelope, raising it so they could see it. "Care to explain this?" I asked. My voice was surprisingly calm, though a storm raged inside me. I watched their faces closely. Mom was the first to recover, but her smile, always so quick to reappear, looked unnatural this time. "Well, we were going to tell you," she began, but I interrupted her. "When? Before or after I gave you the car? After you told me how proud you were of me?" Dad took a step forward, raising his hands as if to placate me. "Jen, nice, this isn't what you think. We didn't mean to." "Didn't mean to what?" I snapped, feeling a wave of anger rise within me. "Didn't mean to discuss this with me? Didn't mean to tell me that you're leaving everything to Jessica? That much is perfectly clear, Dad." I noticed how Mom's face, which had seemed bewildered just moments ago, suddenly turned hard. She gave me a look filled with cold resolve. "How dare you?" she said sharply, her voice rising to that piercing tone I remembered all too well from childhood. "How dare you go through our private documents? This is outrageous." I laughed, a hollow, almost lifeless sound, even to myself. "Private documents? In a house that I pay for? With bills that I cover every month? Those private papers, Mom. Dad cleared his throat, clearly sensing that things were spiraling out of control. Jen, nice, be reasonable, he said, trying to sound calm, but his voice wavered with uncertainty. You've already achieved so much. You have your own money, your own apartment. Jessica, she needs this more than you do. I stared at him, disbelief flooding through me. This isn't about who needs it more, Dad. It's about honesty. If you wanted to leave everything to Jessica, fine. But why couldn't you just tell me? Instead, you went behind my back, right after I gave you a gift. Right after you told me how proud you were of me. Mom, apparently losing her patience completely, snapped. We don't owe you any explanations, Jen, nice. We're your parents. This is our property, and we can do whatever we want with it. I almost yelled back, but instead, I replied with measured restraint. Your property, huh? Say that again. Because I'm the one paying for this property, Mom. All these years. She extended her hand. Give me the envelope, she demanded, ignoring my response entirely. Her voice grew even colder. And I think you need to leave. Don't come back until you've learned some respect. I stood there, looking at the two people I once considered my closest family. My mother, red with anger. My father, avoiding my gaze. Slowly, I placed the envelope on the coffee table, feeling as if every cell in my body was screaming to just run away from this place. Keep it, I said quietly, nodding toward the envelope. Keep all of it. Without waiting for their response, I turned, walked out the door, got into my car, and drove away. My mind felt foggy, disconnected from reality. By the time I reached my apartment, I couldn't even remember the drive. A hot shower was supposed to help me calm the storm of emotions inside me, but instead, it only made me more acutely aware of what had just happened. That's when my phone rang. Jessica's name appeared on the screen. I answered before I'd even decided whether I wanted to speak to her. How dare you, she screamed, not even giving me a chance to say hello. How dare you try to steal my inheritance? You're already rich, why do you need help from Mom and Dad? I took a deep breath, trying to keep my composure. I don't need that house, I said, forcing myself to speak as calmly as possible. Liar, she cut me off. You've always been jealous of me. You've always wanted more than you deserve. But guess what? Mom and Dad know better. They chose me. I felt my pulse quicken, but instead of yelling back, I said, Jessica, I'm literally paying your rent right now. Her voice only grew louder. Oh, there it is. You're always throwing your money in everyone's face. That's all you care about, isn't it? Money. A laugh escaped my chest, bitter and slightly unhinged. It was the laugh of someone who no longer knew what to say. I care about money. I exhaled, but Jessica wasn't listening. She continued her tirade. I simply pressed the red button, ending the call, and tossed my phone onto the couch. Walking over to the window, I stared out at the glittering city lights. The silence of my apartment wrapped around me like a heavy, suffocating blanket. My hands were trembling, but I forced myself to take a deep breath. And then another. And I went back to work, the one thing that had never betrayed me. From that day on, my team became my true support system. None of them pried into how I was feeling or tried to find out what had happened. Instead, we all threw ourselves completely into our latest project, an ambitious animated series that was set to be the studio's most significant creation yet. It demanded everything: sleepless nights spent on sketches, character motion tests, and voiceovers that had us laughing until we cried. Each of us poured our souls into it, and it saved me. Work became my refuge. But on Friday afternoon, my phone rang again. This time, it was my mother's name on the screen. A cold chill ran down my spine. Jen Nice, Her voice was unusually quiet, almost meek. "We need to talk. Dinner tomorrow. It's important." The next evening, I pulled into the driveway of my parents' house. Jessica's car was already there, its shiny exterior irritating me with its smug presence. Stepping into the house, I was greeted by the smell of pot roast, my favorite dish. But despite the warm aroma, the atmosphere was far from welcoming. Mom, Dad, Jessica, and Tom were already seated at the table, as if waiting for a family trial. I took my seat. The silence was heavy, awkward, as though the air in the room had thickened. Finally, Dad cleared his throat. "Jen Nice," he began, "we've made a decision." I said nothing, simply looking at each of them in turn, waiting for him to continue. Jessica couldn't hide the smug grin spreading across her face. "We're transferring the house into Jessica's name," Mom said, her voice unusually firm. "We've already discussed it with our lawyer." Before I could respond, Jessica leaned forward, her expression sickeningly sweet, as though she were trying to appear sympathetic. "Just so you won't be able to contest the will later," she added with fake concern. "We have to protect the family's interests." I repeated her words slowly, as if tasting them, and they were bitter. Protect the family's interests. I looked around the room, trying to understand who these people were sitting in front of me. Mom, who had cried tears of joy when I gifted them the car. Dad, who had said he was proud of me. Jessica, who lived in the apartment I paid for, with a husband who couldn't support their family. And suddenly, everything became crystal clear. "Do you know what I just realized?" I said, pushing my chair back as I stood up. All eyes were on me. I spoke slowly, enunciating every word. "I've been a fool. This whole time, I thought I was helping my family. But I wasn't helping a family. I was feeding an ATM." "What are you talking about?" Mom asked sharply. "I'm talking about the fact that you don't see me as a daughter. Or a sister. You see me as a source of money, a convenient wallet. But guess what? The ATM is closed." "Jen Nice," Dad started, but I raised my hand to stop him. "Starting today," I continued, "I'm done paying your bills. I'm done covering your rent, Jessica. No more gifts, no more transfers. If you want to play games with the inheritance, fine. But you can do it with your own money." The smug expression on Jessica's face shifted to panic. "You can't do this." "Jen Nice, be reasonable," she pleaded, but her words no longer meant anything to me. "Your family, Jen Nice," my mother begged, her voice trembling. "You can't abandon us." I looked her straight in the eyes. "Family doesn't do what you've done. Family doesn't smile at you while stabbing you in the back. Family doesn't take, and take without giving anything in return." Everyone started shouting at once. My mother was crying, my father was calling my name, Jessica was yelling about how selfish I was, and Tom was muttering something about the kids. Their voices followed me as I walked to the door. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. My phone vibrated constantly in the days that followed. Texts, calls, voice messages. They ranged from guilt-tripping attempts to outright threats. I didn't respond to a single one. Then my mother wrote a long post on Facebook. I knew it was her. She had always been the type to air family conflicts publicly when she couldn't get her way directly. Her Facebook post began with, "I never thought my own daughter could be so selfish." She went on to list all the things they had supposedly done for me, how much I owed them, and how far I had fallen by abandoning them in their time of need. "It's every child's duty to help their parents, but some children only think about themselves," she concluded, placing the blame squarely on me as always. I read it with a detached, almost indifferent curiosity. After all, I had long stopped expecting fairness from her words. The comments started pouring in almost immediately. But to her disappointment, the response wasn't what she had hoped for. "Isn't this the daughter who pays all your bills?" one of our cousins wrote. "You mean the one who bought you a new car for your anniversary?" added an aunt. "And the one who paid for your trip to Hawaii?" chimed in someone else. Jessica, predictably, couldn't resist jumping into the comments. She called me a bitter and envious creature who couldn't be happy for others. Her comment was, of course, liked by Mom. That was the final straw. Sitting at my desk, staring at my phone screen, I suddenly felt the need to take things a step further. I opened the folder with my documents and found the paperwork for the car I had gifted my parents. It was still registered in my name. "Hello," I said to the insurance company representative as soon as they answered. "I'd like to report a repossession of a vehicle." My voice was steady, calm. Strangely enough, this decision didn't fill me with anger but with a sense of liberation. They work surprisingly quickly. The tow truck arrived at my parents' house the very next morning. I received a confirmation message just as I was starting my workday. That's when my phone truly exploded. "How could you take our car, you wicked witch? We trusted you. This is theft. We'll call the police." I read their messages with a faint, almost imperceptible smile. I didn't feel anger or hurt anymore. Instead, I felt an unexpected calm. Opening my contacts, I began blocking their numbers one by one. It felt like a physical act of release, cutting off every path they had to reach me. That was 6 months ago. Since then, I haven't spoken to any of them. Occasionally, I hear bits and pieces through the family grapevine, random comments from an aunt or family friends. Mom and Dad are struggling to pay their bills. Jessica and Tom have moved into a smaller apartment. But none of that is my problem anymore. Now, I focus on myself. Every penny I used to spend on them is now being invested in my own dreams. I'm looking for a house with a spacious yard, room for a studio, and maybe even a dog. I've always wanted a dog, but I never had the time or energy because I was too busy solving other people's crises. My YouTube channel is doing better than ever. My team and I just passed the 10 million subscriber mark, and we're expanding into projects I once thought were out of reach. Sometimes I wonder if I made the right decision. But then I remember the day I opened that manila envelope. It revealed the truth in the simplest, coldest, black and white terms. They laughed at my dreams, then demanded the fruits of those dreams. Some might call me cold for cutting ties with my family. But here's the thing, they stopped being my family long before I stopped sending them money. They just didn't bother to tell me. I had to figure it out for myself, buried in the secrets hidden among the old papers in my father's study.